In the field of cybersecurity, it seems as if the hackers are winning. Consider, for example, the Glasgow hairdresser who arrived at his salon early one morning, only to discover that he had fallen victim to a cyber attack overnight. The hackers had encrypted all his computers and displayed a message on the screen telling him what he had to pay to get all his customer details back. This disrupted his business for many days. Then there was the Edinburgh events planner, who received an email from what seemed to be a regular correspondent. It was actually a hacker who was flying under false colors. She clicked on the link in the email and unwittingly gave control of her email client to a hacker who proceeded to send pornography to all her clients. You can imagine how embarrassing that was for her. On a larger scale, in May 2017, a strain of ransomware called WannaCry crippled computers in 150 countries. In this country, the National Health Service was particularly hard hit. It took the affected organizations many weeks to recover, and some, like Honda, actually closed down for a while in order to re-establish normal functioning. It is estimated that WannaCry cost $4 billion worldwide. On a personal level, perhaps you too have been affected by a ransomware attack or by a computer virus, and you know how devastating it can be. When the media reacts to these events, they often seem to want to find out who's responsible. Who messed up? Who is the bad apple? And that suggests that there is actually a single cause. And actually, if you can find that cause and root it out, then we're going to have less cybersecurity incidents. And of course, things are never that simple. There's never a real one cause, as Sandra pointed out this morning. So let's go back to WannaCry for a minute and investigate exactly what happened there. The WannaCry attack was initially blamed on somebody who clicked on a phishing message. But then it became obvious that WannaCry was able to propagate itself from computer to computer without any help from a human. Then, because most of the computers that were affected were Windows machines, old ones, people started saying, well, why didn't Microsoft keep their old operating systems updated and secured? That also turned out to be false. They had, in fact, released an update some weeks before WannaCry happened. Then they started to point fingers at the unsung heroes in our organizations who did their level best to keep our systems updated and secured. Well, then it emerged that the piece of software that was underlying WannaCry was actually developed by America's National Security Agency. It was stolen by one of their contractors and made available to the hackers so they could use it to defraud us. The final blame rested in the lap of the North Korean government, who, it is alleged, bought the software off the dark web and unleashed it on the rest of the world. As I watched these events unfolding last year, it occurred to me to wonder what the point was of all this finger-pointing, blaming and shaming. What were we benefiting from it? Now, blaming is, of course, a perfectly understandable reaction to any event that makes us feel insecure or out of control. But the problem is that it's not helping. It is not reducing the incidence of cyber attacks. Of course, because attacks are very complex and there is no single cause. So blaming is unhelpful, it's simplistic, and it's often unfounded when the wrong people are blamed. But there are another two reasons why blaming does a lot of damage. The first is that when you encounter a cyber event, you're standing in front of a forked path. You can go left and blame, or you can go right and you can learn. And having gone down the blame path, you can no longer learn. So you go down the blame path and you fix on a particular person and you cannot figure out why this thing happened and what you should do to remediate it. And the other thing that blaming does, that's the damage that it does, is that it separates and divides into good and into bad. It excludes the bad from being part of a positive contributor to the cybersecurity solution. I happen to know a lot about exclusion on a personal level. I grew up in South Africa at the height of apartheid. As you probably know, we were separated by race. We lived separately, we were educated separately, and we socialized separately. But within our racial groups, we were also separated by mother tongue. So I went to English schools, and many of the kids who lived around me went to Afrikaans schools. We had very little interaction with each other, and when we did, we usually hurled insults. Apartheid means separateness, but for me it meant exclusion. I was excluded from the lives of those who did not look like me and the lives of those who did not sound like me. When I went to university, I made my first Afrikaans friends, and it opened the world to me of a whole new host of wonderful friendships that I made over the years from the Afrikaans community. I realized then that what exclusion had done was impoverish our relationships with each other. It made us mistrust the other people, it polarized us, and it made it so much easier for us to attribute negative relationships to other people in the groups that we didn't necessarily know. In cyber, we also have groups. We have the people who develop the software, we have the vendors, we have the security professionals, the IT staff, and then we have the end users. And you guys are probably all end users. Everyone who uses a computer, and that includes the smartphone in your pocket, is an end user. When the blaming starts, it's often lobbed between these groups like a hot potato. And the end users are particularly demonized during this process. In the first place, they're called the weakest link, or the enemy. It is particularly telling that during the WannaCry saga, the first people to be blamed were the end users, and in this case, they were completely innocent. But the damage that is done when you denigrate an entire group this way is that you divide them away and you don't allow them to be part of the positive contribution towards cybersecurity. So my argument is that we need a mindset change. A man called Sidney Dekker has proposed this change in the safety field, which is very closely aligned to security. And what he suggests is that we stop considering the little people to be a problem, and that we turn everything on its head and say, how can each and every person contribute to being the solution in cybersecurity? The first consequence is that if an event happens, we don't go down the blaming path, we go down the learn path. We try to identify all the contributing factors. We try to figure out what happened, why it happened, how we can prevent it from happening again. And we refuse to blame people for honest mistakes, only if there's evidence of malicious intent. How do I propose to launch this brave new world? Well, I propose that we start to tell stories about successes. I started my speech by telling you about 3 scary stories. Now I want to tell you that I think this is what we're doing wrong. Whenever you hear about cyber, you're hearing about the bad things. The human brain is uniquely wired to love to listen to stories, to identify with the people in the stories, and to tell them to other people and to remember them. So why don't we start telling successful security stories instead of only telling the bad stories and focusing on the negatives? I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first is a builder I happen to know. He received a message on his phone suggesting that if he clicked on the link, he would get a free flight from a particular budget airline in this country. Having had dealings with this budget airline, he knew that this was nonsense. So he identified it as a phishing message to his great delight, which he continues to tell his family about at regular intervals. Then there is the employee who walked into the ladies' bathroom and discovered a little memory stick lying there labelled promotions. Now, a hacker had planted it there because he was hoping to entice somebody to plug that in so he could get into their computer systems and play games that hackers normally play. Well, despite the huge temptation to plug it in to see who was going to be promoted, she didn't do that. She went and handed it into the security officers and averted the attack. The third example is this very sharp-eyed 17-year-old who saw a skimming machine stuck to the front of an ATM, went straight in and alerted the bank, and saved the rest of the day's customers from having their card details stolen. Resilience comes from collaboration and not from finger-pointing, blaming, and exclusion. I think we need to start working together, because if we stand together, we can resist the hackers. But divided, we are failing right now. So I'm going to end off by suggesting that we really start focusing on the positives, that we tell the success stories, and that we work together to defeat the hackers. Thank you.